Ross, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
So, Ross, you shared an interesting napkin. It's not necessarily, uh, totally different, but I think you've got a different spin on it. I'm really excited to dive in on it. So, your napkin today said, if you have to work on your business instead of in it, from there you can hire, acquire, and inspire. Why did you share that with me?
Well, I think it really goes back to my story of how I started my business, which is a law firm, and coming home 2 weeks before I was supposed to get married and letting my wife know, our future wife, that I had been fired and I was going to start my own law firm, so she should not worry. And she was worried and not happy because her father had been a solo attorney in Vermont, 2 blocks from the border of Canada, in Derby Line, so
Oh,
up
wow.
your way, I suppose, ish. And from there, we got married, we came back. I started my law firm, and I did what every attorney does. I started practicing law, and it was about a year into my business that I was introduced to a business coach, similar to you. And during that meeting, he said something that always stuck with me. He said, "Ross, you're just an employee of a law firm that happens to be named after you." And I was like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, you work. You're an employee of this firm that you claim to own." He said, "Owners of businesses, they work on the business. They don't work in the business." And from there, I began sort of a journey of coaching and executive leadership and hiring people and going out and acquiring new business. And then I'd say really the thing that we probably all spend the least amount of time on in our small business is inspiring and motivating and encouraging our team. And so that's my paper napkin is, you got to work on your business, not in it. And when you're working on your business, you should focus on adding talented people, bringing in new business, and then setting a vision that inspires people to want to follow you.
Yeah, I think it's really well. First of all, what a great truth bomb. You were an employee of a law firm that happens to be named after you,
Yeah.
and I think we get caught up in that. And one of the things that I find really interesting, especially when we're looking at lawyers, we're looking at lawyers to be lawyers, right? Like that's you go to school to do legal work, but
Yeah.
then you made a hard pivot away from that to focus on working on hiring. So look, hire, acquire, and inspire sounds nice, but where did you start on that list of three?
I would say higher. That's, I think the first thing that small businesses need to work on is, especially for the owner, is delegation, right? Being comfortable delegating to other people. And so my first hire was somebody that worked 3 hours a day, 2 days a week. And I think they like opened and scanned my mail and court documents and things like that. And I remember that first week when that happened, I thought, boy, this is the greatest thing ever. I can't believe this exists. And from there, it just sort of it went from hiring someone to really take on all the low value tasks that are not worth the business owner's time, to hiring an attorney and basically saying, okay, you practice law, I run the business, I'm not practicing anymore. And that was probably the natural progression. And then it becomes, continuing to add more team members. And I would say, too, as your business grows, you start to find knots in the hose, right? Things that are tying up your process and procedure. And oftentimes that might be another role or person that you need to hire. And so for me, I always put hire first, because that's the first thing I think small business owners need to learn is how to hire people and how to delegate.
Yeah, one of the things that you said right away is, low value tasks. Now, that's sort of contradictory to what you said immediately before that, because you couldn't believe how much value you got out of
Oh
someone
yeah,
doing those tasks.
yeah,
So you're not really saying the task has no value. You're saying that your energy was better placed elsewhere. And if
sure.
you're hiring well, well, you can actually think about acquiring new business, right?
Correct. That's, so I go out and I hire, and that frees up my time to go out and acquire new business, which for attorneys, most of our business is referral from other lawyers that don't practice the area of law that we do. And I suspect many of your listeners are in the referral business as well, right? Or at least that's a large portion of their business, word of mouth.
Mhm.
And not licking stamps and answering the phone and filing documents freed me up to go out and meet with other attorneys that could refer me business, meet with other professionals that could refer us clients. And so now all of a sudden I'm spending a lot of my time acquiring new business for the firm, which then throws you back to the hire portion. Is, well, I now have to hire somebody to handle all of these new cases for me. And then
Right.
once you do that, you kind of keep kind of rotating back and forth between the two.
So, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the legal profession, and especially, law firms, is how you just said it, right? Other lawyers tend to refer clients to you because they don't practice in that area. But in business, that's like an uncommon referral because you're technically getting referrals from competition, right?
Sure.
So, it, but I think that lawyers do it much more elegantly because of the specialties that you understand that there are these uncommon partnerships available.
Yes.
When did that sort of was that always obvious to you that these uncommon partnerships existed? And how did you nurture them? Because they are uncommon. Sometimes there's a little bit of an overlap, right? People think, oh, I can do a little bit of this real estate, or I can do a little bit of this corporate, and I can do a little bit of this contract stuff, right?
Yeah, I think it went back to working with my executive coach. For me, in the beginning, as I was growing my firm, the referral was to go to the public defender's office, which for your listeners is the attorneys that represent folks that cannot afford a private attorney. And so I'd go beg them for referrals because that's part of their business, is referring out cases that have conflicts and things like that. And as I was meeting with my coach, he sort of introduced me to, well, why don't you go meet with chiropractors? They treat people that get in car accidents, and I bet they would refer you work. And I can remember sitting there one weekend on my couch, sort of just cold emailing every chiropractor in the town that I live in and just introducing myself and asking if they would meet with me. And sure enough, they all did. And everyone to a T was like, no lawyer has ever reached out to us in this town. You're the first. I'd be happy to refer cases to you. And like, next thing you know, like a week later or a few days later, I'm getting a personal injury referral. And I would say the same exists for our estate planning group, right? We go to financial planners, right? Because their clients come to them and they all inquire about their financial plans, but also their estate planning. And so if we meet with the planners and build a relationship with them, they start referring us their clients. And similar, with organizations that you might join, construction organizations, subcontractors. You show up, you build relationships, you go where the fish are and you fish where the fish are, you can start getting referrals. So no, I wouldn't say it like completely dawned on me. It was something that was encouraged to me. And I spent a lot of time doing that type of activity, and I still do to this day.
I love how you went to these uncommon partnerships in other areas. And what also just sort of struck with me, and I really want to ask you about this, Ross. When you made those emails, when you sat down in your living room and clacked out all these emails to these chiropractors in your town, did you did you say, "Hey, will you give me referrals," or do you say, "Hey, will you meet with me?" Because I think there's a big difference between those two questions, right?
Well, I think if I recall correctly, I did say, hey, I'd love to meet with you. I'm an attorney in town, and the purpose of the meeting is I'd like to discuss, referring business to each other, because I get people that would reach out to me who need to go to treatment for injuries as a result of a car accident, and I certainly can make referrals back to them. And so I think sometimes what people don't do in a sales call or a sales email is really clearly define, this is the purpose of why I want to use your time. And I think that's important. Hey, I'd like to meet with you to discuss referrals. So now we're not going to a meeting and sort of talking about nothing and beating around the bush. We're here to meet each other and talk about how we can work together. And I also think that helped me save a lot of time with people who would be like, I would never refer you anything. Or I already refer, I'm not interested, right? And so like now I'm not chasing after them. I'm more focused on the people that are like, sure, I'd love to meet with you.
Yeah, and defining the purpose is really important. So, uh, you did the chiropractors, you went to estate planners. Again, these are uncommon partnerships, and I think that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle to find the uncommon partnership, the uncommon relationship, the uncommon other business that
Yeah.
could be complementary, but not competitive within that space.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so, but think of yourself in the pressure of noise of just starting the practice, the solo practice that you started. Do you think that you would have had the headspace to even think about those kinds of options, that creativity?
No, I think I would, had I not worked with an executive coach, a business coach, similar, to you and others, I'm not sure I would have had the courage or had been encouraged to go out and do that type of thing. And I would have continued to this day to do what I was doing when I first started the firm, which was crisscrossing the state of Maryland, going to court every day, handling clients. And listen, there's no doubt I would have grown, we would have been successful, and each year would have gotten better. And we probably would have hired some people. But I think being encouraged to have the courage to work on the business and not in it, and come to the realization that, hey, you either are going to create a business or you're going to just create a lifelong job for yourself. Which one do you want to do? And I chose to, I suppose, take the harder path of really creating a business. And so yeah, that's, to me, I don't know that I would have probably followed the example of a lot of my peers and colleagues who have, met executive coaches or business coaches or legal coaches and said, that's not for me, it's too much money. And I look back now and I'm like, that's the best money I ever spent in my life, and I'm happy to pay that every single year when it renews. And so yeah, I'm glad I did it.
That's amazing. I also like how you combine courage and being encouraged,
Yeah.
because that's something you also live in your napkin: hire, acquire, and inspire.
Yeah.
And I don't think I mean, just for people listening, check out the napkin because these words are in block letters: hire, acquire, and inspire. And I think they're especially important to you. This part of inspire is really important to you too. How do you how does that work in a legal business?
Oh, I mean, it's no different than any other business. I can remember too, another sort of pivotal moment in my career was after a failure of a merger of a business, and I remember my coach telling me, "You really need to start reading about leadership, and you really need to start reading about servant leadership." Uh, and from there, that set me on a path of reading books about leadership. John Maxwell is a hero of mine, and hopefully some of your listeners have heard of him. And if they haven't, you should go read every single book he's ever written.
Mhm.
And so the inspire portion became really learning about that. A leader's purpose is to add value to others. And most small business owners and people that perhaps are solo attorneys or run small law firms are really focused on themselves and what they can get. And I think really to be successful, you have to flip it and see yourself as serving everybody else and adding value to them. And to me, the inspire part is, do you have a vision and a culture that attracts people to come and want to be a part of what you're doing? And then do you sit down with your team and your people and do you ask them, what are your goals this year? How much money would you like to make? What things would you like to accomplish personally or professionally this year? And when you write that down and you keep track of it and you help them accomplish those things, that's where I think your growth really just explodes. Because your purpose as the leader is to inspire your team, provide value to them, and motivate them to achieve greater things. And most of us as small business owners, we definitely focus on hiring. There's no doubt we focus on acquiring new business, but very few take the next step to see themselves as, man, part of my responsibility here is to motivate, inspire, and set the vision for not only the company, but each person here individually. Rarely do small business owners take that next step. And I think that's really where the big difference happens.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really relatable here for people listening is this is not just a legal business opportunity, right? This is in every business opportunity. I think,
Yes.
you know, E Myth and E Myth Revisited both tell us that, you know, when we're just working in the business, we're we've got a job and sometimes a hobby, not even a job,
Yeah.
because it's not paying well enough. So, for those of you who don't know, John Maxwell's got a lot of really key principles, but one of the first ones is continuous personal growth. Like
The
personal
law of
growth
the
is
lid.
right. Yeah,
The law of the lid. Yeah.
right. Because you got to lift the lid. So how do you do that in your life?
Um, yeah. You know, I'm a voracious reader.
Mhm.
Uh, Probably read, you know, 52 books a year. Uh, Listen to podcasts like yours, right? When I'm in the car, what do they call it? Carpool university, or, like while
Yeah.
I'm in the car and I've got to drive somewhere, I can get a free education listening to a podcast like yours, or listening to another business podcast, or listening to a mindset podcast. So for me, reading is very important, but I also would say lifting my lid is observing and trying to copy what other successful people do. And the crazy part is, for your listeners who perhaps aren't, voracious leaders of business and success and growth, I'll give you kind of a preview, not to save you a lot of time from reading books, but you should go read them. Here it is. They all say the same thing.
Yeah.
None of them say anything different. Now, all of their stories are a little bit different, and what they do is a little bit different. But the principles of success and growing your business and personal growth and it's all the same. It never changes. And I mean, you can go as far back as the Bible, and the same elements and stories and principles exist there. And then when you read a modern day book of a successful person now, you're like, boy, this is the same as that. So, that's not to say, for your listeners, stop listening. You've already heard it. Don't listen anymore. What I'm telling you is, for me, what really works in lifting my lid is every day to be listening to stuff like that, to encourage me, to motivate me, because it's a constant battle as an entrepreneur. I mean, I'm looking at quarterly tax statements right now and having a panic attack, right? And I'm trying to remind myself, you know what? We get through this every year. We grow. This is a sign of growth. You can do this. And so for me, I just think if you're not constantly reading about business and personal and professional development, you're going to let the negativity kind of seep into your brain. And me personally, I have to read every day and listen every day to keep me in the right mindset to motivate me.
I love how you answered the question that I had actually just written. Because if all the books are the same, why keep reading? And I do it for the same reason that you do. Because if we don't, the only way to glide is downhill. The only way to rest is slide downhill. So moving up the hill, moving in a growth direction is an intentional decision. It
Yeah,
requires action.
sure.
Growth requires action. And the action that you're talking about is the deliberate learning, the deliberate, intentional revisiting of the stuff that maybe you've heard 97% of over here before or 80% of over there before, but it's a slightly different angle. It's a slightly different perspective. And maybe there's 1% you can just add into your
Yeah.
world. And how magical when you can, right? And that's
Yeah, I mean, that's what I find is, maybe maybe something needs to be reinforced that you're not doing. Maybe you catch one little bit of nugget that you're like, oh, that's a great deal idea. Maybe you're introduced to a new speaker, author, or somebody that you've never even heard of before. I had heard of, a good example is, I'd heard of Jim Rohn before, right? I'd heard of Jim Rohn, but I had never really dug deep into his material. And now I'm absolutely obsessed with the guy. And I
mhm.
think he's incredible. And I would encourage your readers and listeners, to just go on whatever podcast service you listen to, type in Jim Rohn and just listen to 10 minutes of that guy. And that'll get you going for sure. And that will just take you in other directions. And so, yeah, you got to be intentional about it. You always learn something new. And if you don't learn something new, a concept gets reinforced in you that you're like, oh, I need to do this a little bit better.
Yeah, and there's so many great pieces along the way. So listen, somewhere listening right now, there's somebody who's sort of trapped. They're exactly where you were, working in the business, overwhelmed because they're probably working 80 to 100 hours a week,
Yeah.
maybe solo, maybe alone, maybe feeling alone, feeling a little desperate. What's Go back to your kitchen table when you were starting to make that shift. Tell me, what was the first thing you did?
It was, it, I remember it was, I had had a conversation with my coach, and I had turned him down. Said, no, it's too expensive for me. I don't know. I'm not going to do this. And then I think there was some follow up. And for me, it was, I guess my advice would be like, spend the money,
Hmm.
spend the money, spend the money on coaching, spend the money on books, spend the money on Audible, spend the money on podcasting, spend the money, because really what you're doing is you're spending the money on yourself. So spend the money on yourself. You had no problem spending tens of thousands of dollars on a college education, unless you got a scholarship, I suppose. But like, spend the money, right? Your learning and growth does not end after someone hands you a legal degree. You have to continue to do it every single day until the day you die. You should always be learning to grow. And so I would tell people, you probably are facing a decision right now of, do I, start this marketing campaign? Do I work with this coach? Should I pay $16.99 for this book? Should I go to this conference that costs $6,000? And I would tell you, spend the money,
Hmm.
because if you're spending it on yourself, and you can always say that's not for me, but like, you can't do that until you've taken action and actually seen if it fails or it works. So have the courage to spend the money.
That's amazing. You know, um, what practice, what area of the law did you start off studying
Yeah.
and
I
practicing?
was a prosecutor in Baltimore City. And so maybe
Were
some of
you
you,
in the wire? Is
yeah,
that?
that's what I was about to say. For your listeners, go watch The Wire if you haven't watched that. It's a great show. There's obviously some, dramatization to it, but it's, fairly accurate. So I started as a prosecutor in Baltimore City, and then I moved to the next arena of law that everyone looks so highly on as attorneys. I was a personal injury attorney, right? So car accidents, went
Yeah.
from criminal defense to car accidents. But that was my areas of law. And, I know enough about some other areas that we practice to be dangerous, but not for you to hire me as your lawyer right now. You want the people that are on our team. They're far better than me.
Yeah. And so do you practice at all now still, or?
No, about 6 years ago, I think I really I just stepped out of that role because my focus was on the business instead of in it. Um, you know, I'm still licensed and can go to court, and I'm sure I could do it well. But I completely stepped away, and that was just my choice, and what I've decided to do, and where I think my focus needs to be is on the business.
So what does that mean now? So we understand you sort of described, case. I think people have a vision for what, being a lawyer is, representing clients, preparing documents and making claims and defending them. But what does that mean for you today? Like, tell me what does a day a week look like for you today, Ross?
Sure. I think I woke up at 3:30 this morning. I journaled. I wrote my goals down. I reviewed them. I read some sort of devotional. Um, I'm practicing German. It's what I took in high school. And so, I'm Duolingo. Shout out to Duolingo. Hopefully, they're a sponsor of your show. I practiced that. Uh, I read a little bit, and then I went to the gym for about 90 minutes and worked out and exercised. Got home at 6:30. Got my three daughters, along with my wife, ready for school, and then I drove about an hour to go meet this morning with a key client and partner of ours who has been having some responsiveness issues in our business with them. And so I had to go meet with a key partner for about an hour with his team to reassure them that, I'm gonna, come to me if you have issues. I'll resolve them and give me feedback. Then I came to the office. I calculated and finalized bonuses for people that I'm paying here today. Um, I'm on this podcast now with you. This afternoon, we have an interview for a person to join the company that I'll participate in. This evening, I'm going to go coach my daughter's lacrosse practice this evening. And somewhere throughout the day here, probably for 5 minutes, I have peeked at my email and delegated that to an executive assistant who's virtual and lives in Florida to respond, schedule, pay bills. So I handled that for probably about 5 minutes. And then at some point, I'll wander around and check in on people and pop in, just say, hey, what's going on? But yesterday, by better example too, I probably spent the better part of the first half of the day just doing one-on-one meetings with my direct reports to find out how their prior week was, what projects are they working on, did they hit their numbers, their billable hours, where do they stand in terms of their collections, what consults and new clients are they speaking to. And so the better part of my day is spent hiring people, acquiring new business or saving business, and then leading my team. And that's my day.
Nice.
And then I get up and I would say I spend a lot of it, reading and working on myself. So, what you don't hear is I'm not putting out every fire, right?
Right.
I'm delegating those fires. I'm not going to court. And I'm not responding to every single, ding that happens on my cell phone or email that appears in my inbox. I try to be very intentional. And then before I go to bed tonight, I'll probably spend about 15 to 30 minutes writing on a piece of paper my schedule for tomorrow, because I think there's something to be said about a pen in your hand connecting to your brain. So I'll write out my schedule for tomorrow. I'll write out the 3 things that I need to accomplish tomorrow. And then I'll read and I'll go to bed, and then I'll rinse and repeat. And, I'm sure you've read this too. But success is kind of boring. It's the same thing every single day, over and over again, and being disciplined. And that's the bridge to success, is being disciplined.
Yeah, absolutely. What time do you go to bed at night?
Probably about between 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Yeah. 8 and 9.
I reckon it was pretty early. The
Yeah.
Your one-on-ones. I want to switch back to your one-on-ones, and one-on-ones are so important. How often do you do your one-on-ones with your key reports?
Once a week, typically on Mondays. So yeah, once a week, about 15 to 20 minutes, kind of has a flow, checking in. And then, there's pop-ins throughout the week, but those are key. I would, your listeners that have a team, you're not meeting with them enough. You're not communicating with them enough. You're not being clear with them enough about what it is they need to be doing. And you think you are, but I can assure you, you're not. And
Yeah.
the one-on-ones help with that. And that's something I learned from Dave Ramsey and his Entre Leadership platform. And I think those are vital because things can get off the rails quickly. And the one-on-one is where you need to have the courage to encourage them to get back on track, right? Or encourage them to be like, great, you're killing it. This is awesome. And so it's always a mix of the two. And that's leading, right? Having the courage to have uncomfortable conversations with folks about how they're doing. And despite what your readers or your listeners might think, your people crave feedback. They're desperate for it. They want to know how they're doing, and they don't want to know once a year. They want
And
to
no
know
one
all
wants
the
to
time.
guess. No
They
one
want
wants
to
to
know
guess.
all the time.
Yeah. No
All
one
the
wants to
time.
guess how they're doing.
Correct.
The fun thing about this, and I love that you talked about one-on-ones, and you love that you talked about one-on-ones being once a week, because there's a lot of science that talks about how if you check in with people once a week, people believe it's about them. The
Yeah.
closer you get to once a month, people believe it's about you.
Yeah, I've
You're
never heard that. That's great.
you're supervising them. You're checking into them for your interests if it's once a month, and it's destructive, but it's constructive, and you can build rapport when it's once a week.
I love that. Yeah.
So, Ross, we do this thing at the end of our episodes, and it's a hat tip to John Rulin. John Rulin, the author of Giftology, was an early guest on the podcast, and he shared a powerful napkin with us. What you appreciate appreciates. John suddenly passed away a few months ago, and this
Hmm.
season we've been honoring his memory and his gift to us with his paper napkin, asking our guests to pay forward some appreciation into the world. So, is there someone or something that you'd like to appreciate or give gratitude to today as we close?
Yeah, I love that. I'd give it to my late mother. I'm sure she's listening and watching me every day. But back to my initial story where I come home, tell my wife I've been fired. I'm starting my own business. We go to the wedding, we get married, and I found out months or maybe years later that before we got married at the wedding, my mother went up to my future mother-in-law and said, "Don't worry about Ross. He's going to be okay." And I think, she was my first encourager. She was probably the first person that really truly believed that I could be successful in doing this. And, shout out to mom and shout out to anyone else out there that's, your first encourager, the first person that ever truly believed in you and your ability to go out and start your own business. If that person's still alive, I'd write them a handwritten thank you note today.
That's beautiful. I do want to. I usually just end the episode right there, but I want to give you a shout out for the fact that you prioritize in your business life taking care of your daughter and your daughters and your family in the morning. I have three as well, and I know the routine of waking up and helping with lunches and breakfasts and getting them out in the morning,
It's
and then
chaos.
it's yeah, it's a battle. And then lacrosse in the afternoon, and being there to coach her as well, being on both ends of that day. Shout out to you for paying that same encouragement forward to your children. It's a powerful gift. Thank you,
Yeah, thank
Ross.
you very much.